Hey, Jen.
Hey, Dana. Hi, everyone.
Welcome to Hypnosis.
And beyond.
Today we have Timothy September, creator of Enter the Loop and head of coaching at Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. He is on a path to creating 1 million conversations that change lives.
Welcome, Timothy. Would you like to tell us how you ended up on Hypnosis and Beyond today?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. The brief version, I know because we're on time here, is I used to be a life coach. Before that, I was a glassblower. And I would travel all around the United States. I had a mobile glassblowing studio, and I would talk with people at my vendor booths and everything like that. And over time, I realized that the conversations I was having were much deeper than just buy my stuff. And I also found that those conversations were more fulfilling than buy my stuff. And so I decided one day I'm just going to get rid of the business and pivot and do something that was more fulfilling with my life and gave me a sense of purpose. And that was life coaching. At first, I didn't really know what that was, or hypnosis was never even on my radar. And after the years, grew and my clientele grew, I started running into issues in my business, not so much the business side of things, but more about how I was helping people. Wasn't really that good. The life coaching stuff was great, but I was finding that it was taking months and months and months. And sometimes I would just end up in these like repeating circles and I wasn't helping them. So I started learning about NLP and I started introducing NLP things and like the techniques, like the drop down through and, visual squash and like all these things that we learn in NLP. But then I started going down the rabbit hole of like the history of it and realizing hypnosis was this thing. And then out of the blue, one day, a colleague of mine who was in the life coaching space in Virginia was like, "Have you ever wanted to learn hypnosis?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, it's on my radar." And he said, "You should check out Mike Mandel Hypnosis." I never once even knew that the company existed, never knew who Mike was, never knew anything about hypnosis at all, except for the NLP stuff. Found MMH and was like blown away by the content and everything else. And the rest is here. Chris and I were talking back and forth. You're like needed in the community. You're an amazing asset. You're always answering people's questions and doing group demos. And it was before practice rooms or any of that stuff existed. So him and I worked out a deal and I started writing blog posts for them in exchange for my membership. And it ended up turning into this wonderful thing where COVID had made them shut down the architecture of hypnosis. And I presented them this idea of why don't we just do it online? And that's where Foundations Live came from. So we transitioned the architecture of hypnosis into something that people now have been doing for like 5 or 6 years. And it's been incredible. So from that point, I decided, well, I really love this hypnosis thing. The feedback I kept getting though while we're doing foundations is like, well, how do I do this in like my sessions? And I realized there was this disconnect because most people, and you have to let me know if anyone listening and even you guys, if this is how your traditional hypnosis session goes, right? It's sometimes discovery call, they get in your office and you're like now doing the intake. And then it's okay. I've heard enough, of your story. We're now going to do the session, and it's like this completely separate thing. I don't know. And then you finish the session hoping you did it right. And then at the end, that's when you go, did I do it right? And the client goes, yeah, or yeah. And that's kind of the journey that everyone went on. And there was this struggle in that middle part of like, am I picking the right technique? Is it the right person? Am I doing inductions right? There are all these questions. And I realized that with my own personal clients, I wasn't getting some of the same issues that a lot of other people were. And the disconnect was that I was spending a lot of my time just talking to them. It was like outside of the traditional hypnosis realm. And I started realizing that the way that I asked questions from the training I had and everything, it ended up actually making things easier. So I started building this thing called Enter the Loop. It was a three-year process. It was like I had learned some stuff from a guy named Scott Jansen. I don't know if you guys know who Scott Jansen is, but he's an Australian hypnotist, and he had this course called Advanced Conversational Hypnosis, where he taught this idea of like you're asking questions and that's kind of generating trance. But the training, it's great. I never like putting down other trainers. The training was great. I just didn't understand a lot of what he was doing. I didn't understand the material, and that could have been me. But the thing that I absolutely gained from it was we can ask questions and create trance. And from there, we can actually create change. So I started doing my own investigation into all these books from the Milton Erickson Foundation. And I discovered that Ernest Rossi and Milton Erickson actually talk about this. Specifically on page 191 in this version of the book, Hypnotic Realities, they actually talk about how questions can facilitate trance. And it's one of the ways that Erickson would bypass the critical faculty and start creating change was by asking questions. And so that led me down this massive rabbit hole that I now call Enter the Loop, where I discovered the frameworks that he was using were easy to apply to like everyday conversation. So I don't just have to be in the therapy office. I could be at the grocery store. I could be standing in line for coffee. And if I just know how to ask the right question, I can elicit a response that's hypnotic and oftentimes will change the person's perspective. It'll change, reframe their, reality of what the problem could be. Sometimes it just wipes the problem out completely because they didn't realize the resource they needed was always there. They just had to have the right question to access it. And so that's been my journey for the last now, what is it, 2026? So yeah, it's been 11 years now, I think.
I'm just thinking, so you're doing your therapy and you're using conversational hypnosis your way, Enter the Loop, using like this recipe. And then you decided to then create like an amazing framework, right? So what made you decide to include these specific superstars?
Yeah. So I didn't just like pick and choose from my favorites. I really like I said, it was a 3-year project before I even launched it to the public. Nobody knew I was doing this. But I started pulling all of these like testimonial and manuscripts from various people like James Tripp's Hypnosis Without Trance model. So it's a fascinating model for how hypnosis is created without trance being a thing. But one thing that James Tripp didn't realize is that the framework that he has on hypnosis without trance is the same framework even in life coaching many people have with their problems that they consider their real problems. But most of our problems, almost everybody's problem, it's a concept. It doesn't actually exist, right? It's that thing that I thought about that I said 2 years ago and now it's on repeat. I keep forgetting my car keys and I don't know why. I wish my habits were different, right? It's not like there's anything physical stopping people from accessing those things or having the life they want. Oftentimes it's just things in their life end up getting in the way, oftentimes of themselves, right? So looking at James Tripp's model of hypnosis without trance made me realize it's kind of the way people talk about their problem. There's a belief. They imagine the belief is actually happening. There's a physiological response we typically would call a sensation or an emotion. And then they experience it as though it's real life. And then that feeds their belief. And people ruminate all the time, right? So James was one massive, person that I brought in, and I asked him, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. Can I use your model?" And he goes, "Absolutely, of course." And I even had in this last Hypno Thoughts, I had an awesome time. We all sat at dinner, and I sat next to him, and we're jiving about like what we're doing and stuff. It's great. James is amazing, and of course, I had Mike Mandel's stuff, and all of Mike's frameworks on change work changed my life. Mike and Chris absolutely transformed me into who I am today. I wouldn't be who I am without them. So I wanted to bring in all their frameworks. The thing that I wanted to get away from, though, is how most other people teach like conversational hypnosis. They teach it in language patterns. They teach it in specific phrases you have to say, and unless you get it right, it's wrong, right? I didn't want to be that guy because that's looking at each individual tree when you're standing in a forest, right? So instead, I wanted to look at principles because that's how Mike and Chris taught me in the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. It's all principle based. So when I started looking at the way that Milton and Ernest Rossi and so many other people, Richard Hill, Melissa Tiers, like all of these people that are principle driven, right? Their training is these are the core principles and the foundations that make this work. It was the aha, how, and why, not just the here's what to do. And I hated that because so many trainers, they have great material, but it's the what. And no one really ever teaches the application, which is the why and the how. You need why for the meaning because that's how you store it into deep memory, but you also need the how for the doing because that's how you turn something conceptual into something real. So I started grabbing all these people's stuff and I started noticing that most people who were principle based all kind of used the same principles. There's external trance indicators, which kind of tell you when something's happening. Is the person going into trance or not? You also have the idea of Clark Hall in 1933, anything that assumes trance causes trance. We all kind of know that in this industry, but if you've never heard of that, it's basically Clark Hall was a Harvard psychology professor, and he was one of the people that taught Milton. And one of the things that he discussed in his book, Hypnosis and Suggestibility, is that anything that we would assume would be hypnosis or hypnotic actually causes it. So that's where we get catalepsy, like because spontaneous catalepsy, which is suddenly an arm goes rigid, it's the antagonist and agonist muscles become waxy and immobile. That is typically a what we would call a hypnotic phenomena that happens when somebody's in trance. But Clark Hall realized that we can do this first and we end up on the other end of the loop. We end up getting trance. So I realized that that happens with language too. And we never knew it. Nobody realized it. Here's the secret. I started looking at like Nuvi, and this is from Mike Mandel, right? Mike and Chris teach this thing called Nuvi, which is the way that we teach it is just an exercise on how to speak hypnotically by speaking word salad. So you take nominalizations, which are words that are nouns, but they have no physical structure. Like this cup is a noun, right? I'm holding it in my hand, it's here, but I can't hold success or I can't hold love, right? Like we can all have them. But regardless of the size of the container, no matter how big or small, we can't put it inside of it, right? But I can put a cup, I can put the spaceship, I can put anything physical inside a container, right? Well, nominalizations are one, but unspecified verbs, that's the UV part of Nuvi. Unspecified verbs are verbs, but that don't tell you how to, like, what's happening, right? So I might say, hey, go water this plant, right? Go grow that tree. But if I just say, and grow, but I don't really tell you what, it makes you start to fill in the blank. So Nuvi from Mike Mandel Hypnosis was one of my first ahas with understanding this whole principle of anything that assumes trance causes trance. Because the way that Mike and Chris teach it is kind of the opposite, where they just say, if you start speaking these words, the person will start going inside because they have to create their own meaning, just like you did, right? Like if I say success, it's going to be different to anyone listening. It's going to be different to you guys, each of you individually, and myself included, because we're not really saying one, success where? In our relationships, in our business, with our dog and our cat. Like, what is success, right? We're not defining it. And two, when people hear a word, they don't actually hear the definition of the word as well. They hear their own associations with that word. No matter, like I said, success in your business is probably different than success at home or success in the car or like wherever you could imagine being successful, right? So when we go inside, meaning that we become introspective to what's happening in our internal world, that is us starting to create trance. So every time you use a nominalization or an unspecified verb, there's this open loop because there's nothing that is finishing it. Like if I said the brown dog jumps over the fence, you can imagine a brown dog jumping over the fence. But if I said the animal jumped, you're now like, what animal? Jumped over what? So now you're having to create it, meaning you're already kind of going inside to create trance. So how Nuvi works with Mike Mandel and Chris Thompson, the way they teach it is we just start to speak nominalizations and unspecified verbs. And it's like, and you can experience the love and transformation. And as you grow and begin to develop, like, you see, I haven't said anything, but just me doing that is like, oh, I have to go inside and I have to attach meaning to whatever the words are, right? So I promise we're getting somewhere with this, right? So with Nuvi, that is one end of the loop. But I realized that when we're all talking, specifically my clients at the time, they were sitting in my office and they were speaking Nuvi at me. They just didn't realize it, but it's how they talked about their problems. And so I started realizing, oh, well, if they're speaking Nuvi at me, what happens if I help them start to unpack their nominalizations and unspecified verbs? And I learned this from Judy Reese and Wendy Sullivan. They wrote the book Clean Language, which is all based on Dr. David Grove's idea of clean language. Now, they talk about it as though you could only apply it to metaphor. And I was like, what else could I apply this to? So I started doing it with nominalization and unspecified verbs. And guess what? Same thing happens. People go into trance when they have to unpack what those words mean. So that starts opening up new loops. And it also ended up helping me start to identify that it's not just metaphor that can create trance, it's also the specific language our clients use. So what ends up happening is when our clients are talking about their problem, they're using Nuvi language. And if we know that metaphor, for example, not the metaphor that we all, understand of like, oh, well, they kicked the bucket. That's a metaphor for someone passing away. But in hypnosis, when we say metaphor, what we're really talking about is a story that can help generate change. And the way that it's been described to me and the way that I've experienced it myself is when someone's delivering a metaphor, it's typically I'm telling you a story, but we experience metaphor every day in the forms of music, in the forms of art, writing, literature, movies, you name it. If we are experiencing it and it doesn't apply to us, but afterwards we feel something changed, that's metaphor, right? So in clean language, David Grove, well, really, Wendy Sullivan and Judy Reese, breaking down David Grove's stuff, talk about how metaphor is different for everybody and it has a different meaning to all of us too. And when you help the client unpack it, they start to create different meaning and they have a new perspective. So when I start doing that with Nuvi language, like clients talking about procrastination, and what most people think is that the client's telling a story about their life and all this stuff, but their story's a metaphor. And so if you know how to just talk about your problems, well, you're speaking a metaphor. But how do you break that down? Well, Mike and Chris taught that metaphor, it's the content is there to distract the conscious mind, but it's the structure of the metaphor. That pattern matched one-to-one. Oh, your brother's the eggplant and your sister was the gerbil. And did you get it? Like they're on the same time frame. Like by doing that, you're making this what we would call isomorphic one-to-one metaphor. And telling that would help someone change. But if we break that down, meaning we reverse what's happening, we get the exact same Clark Hall 1933. That means that if I just start to break apart your metaphor and I get rid of the stuff that doesn't make sense, like, oh, it was a blue house and it was a Thursday, no one cares. Get rid of that. And I just look at the structure. I'm looking for their Nuvi language. I'm looking for their metaphors. I'm looking for the times that parts show up when most people have no idea. Like people will talk in third person and not know it. They'll reference things like, oh yeah, you know how when you go to the store and you're looking for that thing and me, I'm not doing that. You are. And they go, oh, I'm so sorry. People will talk in third person. People will also talk about themselves in third person. That's parts language, right? But unless I was calibrating this, unless I knew what to listen for, unless I knew what was happening, Into the Loop wouldn't exist. I would just be hearing people's talking about their problems and me hoping that I'm matching the right, script or the right technique with the right problem. And I would still be where I am. All this to say, when I was finding everybody's stuff that I could, it has to be principle based. I have to be able to use it in conversation. And it has to be almost so natural that people have no clue I'm doing it. Because even the trainers that are really good at conversational hypnosis, you can tell when it's happening. Yeah, they sound like they're hypnotic. Like you can tell. But so far, I have been all over now the last 5-6 years doing Enter the Loop with multi-millionaires. I mean, like Chris and I, we attend our own masterminds with people who are way above my pay grade. And I sit and talk with them all the time. And those people have the exact same problems we do, and I can talk to them the exact same way. I don't have to pre-frame it as this cool thing that we do, and there's no skeptic. There's nothing there but conversation. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what profession you're in. We all have problems, and if we can get them to talk about them, we can help them. That's it.
And I mean, I just love the way you explained that. I just learned something more and more. And I appreciate the listening too, because like actually really holding space and listening to somebody, I mean, it doesn't happen very often. Like, so really people could do this in their everyday life.
Yeah,
Like beyond practitioners, there could be other people coming just to learn how to have better conversations, maybe. I mean, yeah, so it's so needed. I'd love for you to explain the loop a little bit more and the Ziegarnik effect and all that, because I just find that so fascinating.
yeah. So along with the principle-based approach, I think frameworks are they're not just something that I think training needs. I think it's almost a darn near necessity. I could have all the language patterns and all the inductions and all the techniques that, I could have it all in a book and open up whenever I want and have access to it. But man, if I didn't know like what just some of the underlying frameworks were of change work or how problems happen, why people develop them, like if I didn't understand any of that, none of it would matter. So when it came to conversation, I knew that I had to have more than one framework to go off of. And I knew for certain that it had to be something that was easy to understand, that it didn't have a long acronym that no one would get. And the way that I was learning hypnosis, again, from Mike Mandel and Chris Thompson in the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy, it's principle based and it's framework driven. So one of the frameworks in that is this idea that Milton talks about and Ernest Rossi and Richard Hill and all these people talk about. It's called the psychodynamic loop. And it's just that in the old way of hypnosis, it used to be like cause and effect. Like the hypnotist would do a thing and the subject would then react based on the thing the hypnotist said. Well, that puts all the onus of change on the hypnotist rather than it being on the client to be the one doing the change themselves. So the psychodynamic loop is where instead of it being cause and effect, directly, instead what Milton discusses are the two ideas of utilization and incorporation. To utilize what the client's doing means that when a client says or does something in the session, instead of you just, like I said earlier, like the metaphor, just like throwing it to the side, like, oh, thanks for that information. I don't need that. I've got the perfect script already. Instead of doing that, you use what they give you as though it's supposed to be there. So you're utilizing this. And what Erickson would do, for example, is when someone is going into trance, let's say he's trying to deepen it and they would move. He wouldn't just say, oh, you're supposed to stay still. You're not supposed to move. Instead, he would say, that's right. And even if you have to move a little bit, just know that that takes you even deeper. Right? So he uses their movement, right? But we can utilize a lot of things. And in this case, I utilize the client's language, right? Another framework is incorporation, meaning that something external to the session is brought into it. So in the framework of the psychodynamic loop, you can utilize what the client gives you and incorporate external things that can help deepen the trance or deepen the level of, self-awareness the client has, more introspection. So that's just what we call the psychodynamic loop. Well, along with the psychodynamic loop, another one starts to develop, and that's something called the Ziegarnik loop, often called the Ziegarnik effect. Bluma Ziegarnik, back in the 1920s, she was a Soviet-Lithuanian psychologist, and one day she was sitting at a restaurant and she saw how the waiter was able to remember everybody's stuff until the check came. As soon as the person wrote their name, signed, said, yep, I paid for it, the waiter or waitress or server, whatever you want to call them, forgot everything, who was sitting where, what anybody ordered. But yet moments ago, they were able to easily recognize what was happening. They were able to see who's ordering what and remember who had which and what table they were at. And as soon as the check was cleared, they lost it. So she started doing her own experiments and come to find out that That's how we operated something called the Ziegarnik effect or the Ziegarnik loop. And the easy principle is that when an open loop is open, it will persist until it closes, meaning it will stay open until you close it. Now, what this means for change work, and this is something that I stumbled on. I don't know the specific literature I stumbled on this, but it opened up everything for me. And that's Bluma's friend, Maria Ovsiankina. She created something that is in addition to the Zygarnik effect, is called the Ovsiankina effect. What Bluma discovered was like this idea of open loops staying open until they're closed. But what Maria discovered is that once those loops are open, if somebody becomes distracted from closing the loop, or if somebody ignores the loop, or they self-distract, or they get pulled away from it, or whatever it is from closing the loop, over time, and it could be minutes, it could be days, it could be, for a lot of people, it's their whole life, right? At some point, there's going to be a switch internally where they have to not just close the loop because they want to. It turns into what's called a quasi need. They absolutely have to close this loop in some way, shape, or form. The experiments they ran on this were incredible. What they would do is they would put all these people into a room and they would have three separate sections of people. The first would be people that they'd put in the room, and from start to finish, they were allowed to do puzzles. So they would have like 10 or 20 different puzzles, and they'd give them like 5 minutes. And they say, okay, do as many puzzles as you can. And so they would do them. Everyone would leave and they'd feel happy. Then the second set of people, they were given the same 20 puzzles or whatever, given the same amount of time, but they were stopped halfway to go to the restroom and then come back and finish it. And what they did is when they went to the restroom, they were recording the conversations they were having, and everyone was so jazzed, they were excited to go and finish the puzzles. So then the third set of people come in, and throughout that entire time frame, they kept getting interrupted and stopped and, oh, hey, we got to do this other thing. And so the more and more they were interrupted and the more and more that they had to ignore finishing the puzzles, the angrier and angrier they got. So they did this with a whole bunch of people and kept seeing the same results. So the Ovsiankina effect is essentially, if you can't finish closing the loop, at some point it's going to turn into a quasi need. And they've found this with functional magnetiscence imaging, like fMRI machinery, they hook up to your brain and they can see all the scans and all the cool stuff. They hook people up to these machines and found that when the Ovsiankina effect kicks in, the body will actually respond as though there's anxiety happening. So people will start to become anxious. They will become irritated. They will get angry and frustrated at being unable to close the loop. So all of this comes in. When we think of the things that have happened in our lives, all the experiences we've had, the ones that we often forget are the good ones, right? Well, think about it from the perspective of Bluma and Maria. We've opened a loop, we finished it, and now we forgot about it because it was something great that happened. Oh, I had a good day, everything went well, I went to sleep, boom, open, closed, easy. But the things that we struggle with, like that weird thing I said to my girlfriend's mom 5 years ago that I still think about, why am I still thinking about it? It's an open loop. And how often do you guys in your own profession, or anybody listening, if you're, a professional hypnotist or a coach or anything, how often do you hear a client say, oh, I've just been thinking about this thing nonstop for the last X amount of years? That is the Ziegarnik loop and the Ovsiankina effect now coming in. Not only is the loop open and needs closed, but the Ovsiankina effect means they're coming to see you because they've tried so much and they've reached the point of threshold. They absolutely need something to change. It has to be them and it has to be right now.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So I've got lots of work to do after this interview. Lots of loops to close.
Oh.
Well, I think something that is really interesting is just this concept of a conversation being enough to elicit change. So, is at the core of your philosophy, your approach, your modality, is the concept then that um, healing and transformation is in the conscious mind as well as the unconscious mind, and or are they working together? Like if talk therapy, right, has some limitations for some change in some areas, how is your process addressing that in a different way?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Super easy. So when you think of traditional talk therapy, what people will typically do is they will talk, I don't want to say around the problem, but they'll talk about the problem as though it's like a living person, it's right there in front of them, and they talk about it. They don't talk into the problem. When I say enter the loop, I really mean that. Because one of the loops that I haven't talked about is our own intrapersonal loop, the self to self loop. It's one that we all have. It's the one that if somebody says something to you that you disagree with, it's that, red flag that goes off in your head and you're like, "Nope, sorry, not listening," right? We have our own loops. In hypnosis, we call that like our critical faculty, right? I actually have this thought, and I don't have any direct source material to quantify this, but I actually think that our conscious mind is partially part of our critical faculty. Because in our general industry, we don't really know what the critical faculty is. It's not like there's a part of the brain that we point to and go, there it is. But we do know for certain that even when the critical faculty is to the side, we end up having something called the hidden observer. And the question that I would have is like, how are they not one and the same? Because I can also be observing and still be critical, but it's when we remove the critic out of the way, that's when the person's more accepting of the things that we're suggesting. That's the whole idea, right? So in traditional talk therapy, the critical faculty is still there. And also in traditional talk therapy, the way that I've experienced it, my wife is a licensed psychologist, or sorry, licensed mental health counselor here in the state of New York, not psychologist, misspoke. And one of the things that she talks about is, even in her own work, is that the clients will talk about the problem, but they're not actually entering the problem because there's so much stigma around, oh, we don't want to re-traumatize people. We don't, like that kind of stuff. That only happens if you talk about the content of the metaphor, not the structure. The content of the metaphor is like the who, what, when, where, why, right? But the structure of the metaphor, those are all the hypnotic things that we want to look for. They're metaphor, like I said, nominalization, unspecified verbs, right? So how it works in the way that I've experienced it myself, and Jennifer, you can, because you've experienced it too on your end, is that I'm not talking about the problem. I'm talking about the ingredients of what make it the problem. And so instead of me having to out logic or out critical faculty or whatever you want to think, I'm not consciously saying, oh, things have now changed. But instead what I'm doing is I'm allowing my unconscious mind, and that this is me as the client, I'm allowing my unconscious mind to take conceptual ideas and mash them together and see what happens, right? Like there's no reason at all that anybody in the world has ever thought of like how success and freedom, how they mash together, right? Like I don't know, usually they're like, I don't know, maybe I'm successful and that gives me freedom, right? But they, even me saying that, they're two separate things. But what happens if I ask how they're related? Well, that starts to make your brain and my brain and anyone else that's listening, it starts to generate new thought, new idea, right? When people talk about their problems, typically by talking about the problem, it also includes the guardrails of the problem. Like if I'm inside this cup and I've never seen the outside of the cup, I would never know it has a handle. If I was inside the cup and that's my problem, and my answer is, oh, well, I can't hold the hot cup because it's hot, and the answer is, oh, but it has a handle, I'm not talking about what's in the cup. I'm talking about the structure of the cup, right? So we can do the same thing with conversations. I'm not asking you to bring up the thing that happened when you were 5 years old or anything like that. I'm asking you, what was what I call the important listening points from that moment? Like, what are the nominalizations that you'd use to describe it? What are the metaphors that show up when you talk about that thing again, right? And then what I want to do is I want to see the other side of it. So something that John Overdorf taught is called the meta pattern. And Melissa Tiers teaches it in this way. It's called ADAC, where you associate into the problem, dissociate from it, associate into what we would call a peak performance state, and then we want to collapse the two together. Well, the same thing applies here, where if I'm talking about the important listening points of the problem, I also need to get the other side of it. So once we've talked a little bit about what the problem is, I'll typically ask the very clean language question, what would you rather have happen? So now we get the, if, like in Melissa Tiers uses the magic phrase of, if I had a magic wand, it could poof, like anything, what would it be? And so people will give us the other end. Now, what's interesting though, is that people will talk about the problem and speak their important listening points, nominalizations, metaphor, that kind of stuff, much different than they will with the things that they want. So then all you do is you collapse the two together. You just bring these two things in and you say, well, how does this relate to this? And by doing that, we end up with another principle called fractionation. Every time that somebody goes inside into their intrapersonal loop and then comes back out into reality, whatever that is, and then they go back in, that's one fractionation. We know this from the Dave Ellman induction, where at some point, it's after the hand drop, we have them open their eyes and close them. And we do this 5 or 6 times because while, what's his face? Dave Ellman weaponized this idea that he got from Bernheim. And Bernheim was like, well, if I bring someone into my office and I hypnotize them, and then, a week later I, do it again, and then a week later I do it again, they seem to go into trance faster, quicker. Well, Dave Ellman was like, well, why in the world is this guy waiting a week or a month or a year? Why don't you just do it that same day or the same hour or immediately? That's where we get this idea of fractionation. All we're doing is bringing someone inside and outside, in and out. That's it. That's really the principle of it, right? So to get someone to go inside to their inner world, bring them out. That's the principle. So from a conversational standpoint, all the things that I know that take people into their inner world are nominalizations, unspecified verbs, the metaphor, resource, parts, all those things. So I'm not talking about the problem. I'm talking about the structure that makes it a problem. And once you get somebody to start going inside, after about 2 or 3 questions, we've bypassed their critical faculty. And in fact, even Erickson and Rossi themselves have said that questions will bypass their critical faculty naturally, because a question isn't a statement. It's not a suggestion. You can, of course, have compound suggestions inside of it that we would call an implied directive. But ultimately, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm asking you if you could even possibly think about doing it. And almost all of us can. So questions create curiosity. And once you get somebody to be curious about something rather than critical, all of the walls go away. All of the, things that would prevent the breakthrough go away. And instead you get the person for who they are. You start noticing what I would call conversational trance indicators. External trance indicators are, in our traditional hypnosis sense, if I'm doing hypnosis, I'm watching for these things to happen. But conversational trance indicators are when I'm in conversation and I start to fractionate you by asking questions, I'm going to start to notice the same things I would doing traditional hypnosis and more. I'm going to start to see how you use your hands, because this is hypnotic too. The way that we gesture, the way that we, anchor things into space, the way that we access resources. We do that with our hands. We do that with our eyes. We do that with our whole body, and we do it with words. And so if I ask you a question and I start getting your mind to go inside and generate answers, and I ask you a question that makes it happen again, you're not putting up walls and going, oh, I'm not going to answer that because he doesn't need to know what color the house was. I'm not asking. Instead, if I get you curious about, well, why, when talking about the problem, did I mention this thing which doesn't seem connected at all? I get you curious about it. Now I'm generating, as Melissa Tiers calls it, your own why. We have to have meaning in order for us to have change. It has to make sense to us. The way that Stephen Blake from Old Pain to Go describes emotional and physical pain, I've never heard anyone else talk about it this way, but he's one of the people that I brought in for the frameworks. he talks about change as when somebody walks into his office, they could be holding the hottest thing in the world. And it's like red hot. It's so hot, in fact, they have no idea like when they started holding it, but they just know it hurts. And that's how all of our clients feel when they come in. They're like, I'm in pain and I don't know why. And so what Stephen would say is, oh, I could help you with that. Right? And instead of them going, I love it, let's do it, he said they almost always want to know why. They just want to know, why did this happen to me? Why is this always going on? Right? That is our clients. Our clients just want meaning. They want to have a purpose. It has to make sense. And by asking them about the structure of their conversation, the important listening points, that gives them meaning. Because, like I said earlier, none of us live by the dictionary definitions of many of the words we use. So we might say, blah, 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 success. But that doesn't mean that it's going to match up with the success of their relationships or the success of whatever, right? So I'm not talking about the problem like traditional talk therapy. Instead, we're talking about what creates the problem. What are the ingredients? Because the problem is just the finished recipe, right? So, like, what actually makes it the recipe? And once we figure out what the ingredients are, we can change the ingredients, because there's nothing preventing you from changing your internal definition of what success is. There's nothing preventing you from changing your internal shape of the metaphor, or what the outcome was of it, or what the metaphor is entirely. That was the whole point of David Grove's stuff, is like, we change the metaphor, we change lives. And we can do the same thing with nominalizations, non-specified verbs. That's really what I think makes it different than like traditional talk therapy or whatnot.
Great. What a wonderful explanation. So, boy, I just want to keep asking questions, but I know we have to move on. Um, but let me just ask this one last quick question, and that is, in general, how many sessions would somebody, I know it depends, and there isn't a one size fits all, but in general, what would somebody expect if they were coming to you as a client with an
Yeah. So
issue?
last year, the clients that I did have, because I also still take my own personal clients. I'm happy to be successful in several aspects of my entrepreneurial journey, and I still taking personal clients is one of those. On average, like 3 to 5 sessions, like the traditional hypnosis route. What I've actually found though is I don't need to do the sessions back to back to back to back. Oftentimes my clients will see me for like the first couple months bi-weekly. And then if we hit the like 4, 5, 6 session range, then I push it out to like once a month. And then we check in. And I think that's important too, because there's this misconception in hypnosis that everything is a one session shot. And that's not true. I hate it when people are like, oh, but it should be. It's like, well, but it's not. Because when someone comes to see you, it doesn't matter if you're a therapist, it doesn't matter if you're a hypnotist or a coach or anything. When somebody comes to see you in your office, you're getting the smallest of smallest, tiniest fraction of their life. You get an hour of the totality of their whole life, right? It doesn't make any sense to think that you know better than them or that you can fix them in a single session. I really hate to say that. Now, some stuff, absolutely. Like, for example, phobias. We typically think of problems in the hypnosis space, and really even in life coaching, as either digital, meaning it's on or off, or analog, meaning it's like a dimmer switch. There's a spectrum to it, right? 0 to 100, 0 to 5. It doesn't matter what the number is, it's a spectrum. And so when it comes to problems, phobias are absolutely 100% a digital thing, on off. You can cure a phobia in 10 minutes if you know the fast phobia cure. TV room, the human givens, double dissociated television. There's so many variants of it at this point. Like, if you have 10 minutes to learn the technique, you can do it with somebody and help them with their phobia. Right? Easy stuff. But analog problems, which are like almost every other problem in the world, everything from weight loss to pain reduction to some pain stuff is on off, like fibromyalgia, for example. Mike talks about how he was able to get rid of it in a single session. But for other stuff like pain, weight, smoking cessation can sometimes be a multi session thing. Like, anything that would be habitual, anything that would be emotional, like anxiety. Those are multiple sessions because the person's coming in to your office, and for that 1 hour, they're outside of their usual norm. Once you've done the work, it still takes time to heal. You have rewired parts of their brain that have been wired for years. It's not like it's just going to be an immediate one and done, right? So by seeing them for several sessions and then getting a snapshot, and this is what's calibration. Calibration is seeing the person for how they are in the moment and then what changes. So if I see you for that one session, and that's my only time I'm calibrating is that one session, I don't know if it worked or not until you reach out and tell me, hey, I'm still smoking cigarettes, or I've gained more weight, or whatever it is, right? And that sucks. Nobody wants to deal with that. So that's why I like multiple sessions anyways. So one, I get to watch your journey. I also get to calibrate. So if session one, you come in and things are okay, and then session two, they're getting better. Session three, something falls off the rails. I can just simply ask you, well, what changed? Oh, my ex-boyfriend came back into the, oh, well, there we go, right? It had nothing to do with hypnosis. It had everything to do with the situation and circumstance. We're all humans. We're all, part of this human condition, right? So people will naturally heal at their own pace, their own time. And by multiple sessions, I get to watch them grow and help them throughout it. What's also great is that because it's conversational, I'm not just looking at the one thing that we're working on today, and then I get my script and my technique ready, and that's it. Instead, if they come in and it's something that we haven't even talked about, like I just had this last year. One of my clients paid me really well to help them overcome anxiety with women. And they actually thought they had agoraphobia. So if I would have walked into this thinking, oh, I got to do fast phobia cure, get rid of their agoraphobia, I would have lost the client. But instead, the more that they talked about what was actually going on, I realized it had nothing to do with social. It had nothing to do with them being in public. It had everything to do with themselves. So the conversation started naturally drifting into the inner work. Everything they wanted in our first session they thought was agoraphobia, by the end of session 6, I actually saw them in person because they came to the Architecture of Hypnosis in Toronto this past November. And I got to see them in person. They gave me the world's biggest hug. Everything in their life changed. And they credit the work that we did together. And it had none of the stuff that we did had anything to do with agoraphobia. Yet they're now in a relationship. They're going out dancing. They're having the best time of their life. And it's stuff that we worked on that had nothing to do with the original problem. And I think a lot of our clients are like that. Their problem is not typically going to be the thing they come in with. So we have to talk. We have to get them to open up. And if we think otherwise, we're going to end up being the ones that are hurt because we're going to trap ourselves. And I really do think it's a trap. It's called the technique trap. I talk about it. I have an upcoming book called Enter the Loop. It's something I've been working on for the last year. And it's the technique trap. It's the same one that I fell into, the same that I think many of my students have fell into this, where instead of them being confident enough to do the work, they think, oh, because I had this one client and that one technique I always rely on, or that one script I'm always reading finally stopped working and it didn't work on this person, I now have to go get another training. I have to get another certification, spend more money. And they end up in this technique trap where they collect all of these tools and they're all great. Amazing people have created amazing stuff. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? I also understand that not everything is 100% going to work, right? Even with Enter the Loop. The thing that I teach my students and I tell them is I am not replacing anything you do. It's meant to be an amplifier of what you're already doing. And I really mean that. I would never say Enter the Loop is the thing, you have to use it. It's an amplifier of what you're already doing, right? So instead of collecting more techniques and getting trapped and thinking, oh, this is the one that's going to fix it all, and then when it doesn't, you freak out, it's much easier to just understand how change even happens. Because if it's principle based and framework driven rather than, oh, I have these techniques and now what? Change work becomes so natural. Like I said, seriously, I can do this in a parking lot. Like Chris and I, we flew to the mastermind, and at lunch, over a 20-minute conversation, I helped a multi-millionaire. This guy, mega bucks. I shouldn't even be in the same room with these people. And I had a conversation with him that transformed his life. Chris was there. And even the guy was like, I don't know what you just did, but something has changed. And he goes, and I really mean that. I've helped several people like that, where it's a quick conversation, no hypnosis, but yet they walk away feeling like they just got 100 years worth of therapy. Everyone's capable of that. You guys are. I mean, I'm just some dude. I read some books and put some stuff together. Like really, I'm just some guy.
Love it. And that brings us to our next segment, which is our silly subconscious question. And our question for you today, Mr. Timothy September, is if you were to add a room to your house, what would it be?
I would add like a conservatory. I maybe like even a sunroom. I just want to be able to be outside in a room full of plants. Like you see, I got all my plants here. I just want to be in like a room full of plants. The thing that I imagine is like I'm sitting in the corner with my one of my books, and I'm just like some old wizard surrounded by plants and my dog, and I'm just like ha ha ha, ha. Like that. Like I've stumbled on a like a spell book or something. But yeah, yeah, it'd definitely be like a sunroom or conservatory.
Mike's influence there, right? But of course, he's youthful.
Mike, yeah. For anybody who's listening, gosh darn it, check out the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. Mike Mandel and Chris Thompson will absolutely change your life. They changed mine, and I credit everything to them. They've been fantastic.
Agreed. And beyond what we've spoke about today, is there anything you'd like to leave the viewers with?
Yeah, I I can be long-winded when I talk, and I appreciate the platform to do so. For anybody that might be listening to this, thinking, "Oh, this is this is a little interesting," or "Oh, could I do that?" You can. I when I say like I'm just some guy, I really am. I've went to college, but it's not like I took anything that even be remotely close to helping people with change work. I'm a glass blower. I learned how to blow glass. It was a fine art like degree. Like it's nothing to do with anything that I'm doing, right? So, um, you're capable of doing this. If you're like, look, I'm stuck with my 9 to 5, but helping people sounds more fulfilling. If you even think, oh, I maybe I could do this, you absolutely can. You are more than capable of changing the world. Everybody is. And I don't mean change the world as some cliche metaphor on whatever or a philosophical idea. I'm being serious. When I started Enter the Loop, it was never my thought or job that I would be producing this thing that could help change lives really fast. I just wanted to be able to have better conversations with my clients and help them faster using whatever techniques I could. And it transformed into this whole system that's now called Enter the Loop. And throughout that whole journey, I have worked with and had students who were of every variety you can imagine, from software developers to veterinarians to I have some guy that's a plumber, like, and he uses the techniques that he's learning in Enter the Loop to just help his clients and talk with them and like just have them open up. It's helped people get dates. It's helped people overcome their anxieties of being in social situations. It's helped people learn how to have deeper, better conversations. It's helped me with my spouse. Like, I've learned how to communicate much better because I'm not looking for anything other than understanding, right? It's this idea of curiosity that I think plays into everything, because when we're curious, we end up having this childlike part of us come out because curiosity is right next to like awe and wonder. And these are the things that if you see like a 1-year old who's never seen a bubble for the first time and the bubble's floating through the air and they're like, whoa, that is how I was when I was first learning to do Enter the Loop and like figuring all this stuff out. And now, even like years later, every conversation I have where I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thing that person just said. What is that? And they start to talk about it. I'm like a kid. I'm like, oh, what was that? That was, oh, did you see how that connected to this? And like, and I get giddy inside. It literally is a passion of mine to have these kind of conversations. And so if that's you, like anybody listening, or you, Jennifer, I mean, Jennifer, you're already a looper, but like Dana or anyone else, like I swear, you can do this too. It really is easy. Like hypnosis and change work are easy. We've just put up all these walls and complicated it because we stopped learning how to talk to people. And I think that's partly due to social media and COVID and all these other things, but people have become so recluse, they don't want to have conversations that are deep and meaningful. And one of the things that my good friends in the area often compliment me about is that I'm the guy that they come to when they want to have a deep, meaningful conversation. And I really enjoy that. I'm not the guy that's going to talk about football or what. I'm going to ask you, what are you planning tomorrow? What's the next year of your life going to be like? What are the things stopping you? How can I help you get there? Those are the conversations I have with my friends. And so if that's you, if that's the kind of person you want to be, yeah, like Enter the Loop is a thing for you. Hypnosis is a thing for you. I don't care where you learn the skill, just learn it. The world needs more people like you. And I'm on my journey to a million breakthroughs, helping people with a million of them. I don't know if I'm going to get there. I can't do it on my own, which is why I have people like Jennifer and, one day maybe you if you're listening. So that's the thing that I would want to leave with everyone.
Love it. Well, we appreciate this meaningful conversation that you
Thank you
had
so
with us, and we hope you'll come back. And with that, Jennifer, what do we always say?
Peace out.
Peace
Peace
out.
out.